If it's Friday, it all comes down to this. The race could not be tighter as Vice President Harris and former President Trump hit the trail in critical battleground Michigan, with both campaigns unloading on each other. Plus, in the wake of the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country's war with Hamas is not over, despite renewed pressure from President Biden that it's time for Israel to move on. And a federal judge unseals more than 1,800 pages of evidence in special counsel Jack Smith's election interference case against the former president, despite Trump's lawyers urging the court to wait until after the election. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. As Vice President Harris and former President Trump ratchet up attacks on each other, with polls showing a tightening race with just 2.5 weeks until Election Day. Today, both candidates hitting the trail in battleground Michigan. The vice president speaking in Grand Rapids last hour, while former President Trump will return to Detroit, a city he criticized while rallying there last week. Our own Peter Alexander spoke to the vice president just moments ago at that Grand Rapids event. We will talk to him and we'll hear some of that conversation in just a moment. But today's trip comes as the vice president courts support from across the political and demographic spectrum, reaching out to disaffected Republicans, black voters, and today launching an ad campaign targeting men on sports and gaming sites. It also comes as she seeks to paint Mr. Trump as dangerous to the country, seizing on his comments calling those who oppose him the enemy within.
Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, right? He who has vowed if re-elected he will be a dictator on day one. Someone who suggests we should terminate the Constitution of the United States should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States.
Mr. Trump, meanwhile, tripling down on those comments during a podcast appearance today.
I think we have more of an enemy from within than we do from outside. You know, if you have a smart president, they talk about China and Russia and everything else. If you have a smart president, they're not going to be the problem. We have a bigger problem from within. These are bad people. These are sick people and bad people, and it's true. But I think it's a narrative that they don't like.
The former president has remained laser focused on appealing to his base, personally attacking the vice president on Fox this morning, just 2 days after Harris's own Fox interview.
She's a low IQ person. She's not smart. Everyone knows that. Didn't even pass her law exam. It was a big thing. She never thought she was going to be able to pass it.
The vice president has said that she initially did fail the bar exam, but then passed. Despite the two disparate strategies, the race remains deadlocked in our latest NBC News poll, meaning small margins, just thousands of votes among slices of the electorate in a few key swing states could have an outsized impact on the outcome of the election. Luckily for us, our NBC News team has been talking to some of those key voters. We will hear from them in just a moment, but we do begin with Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander in Grand Rapids with the Vice President. Garrett Haake is following Donald Trump and has a look at how the former president has struggled with some traditionally conservative voters. Trymaine is in Philadelphia, where Democrats have been working to register more black voters. And Yasmin Vossoughian will join us in just a moment. She has been talking to Lebanese American voters in battleground Michigan. Peter, I have to start with you. First of all, congratulations. Big get. You just spoke with the vice president moments after her Michigan event this afternoon. What was your key takeaway, Peter?
I think there were several takeaways. It was a short conversation as she was heading off to two other stops here in this critical state of Michigan, obviously, where she is trying to win one of the blue wall states. She has to likely win all three of them. Wisconsin yesterday. She'll head to Pennsylvania soon here. And one of the questions I think that has been outstanding, Kristen, has been specifically focused on how she will be different than Joe Biden going forward. She's cast herself in recent interviews, including the one with Fox News, saying she will not be a continuation of Joe Biden as president. She says they have different views of the world, among other things. They come from different generations. But I pressed her on that specifically to try to pin her down a little bit more clearly about exactly where those differences may lie. Take a listen. What is one policy that you would have done differently over these last 3.5 years than President Biden?
I mean, to be very candid with you, even including Mike Pence, vice presidents are not critical of their presidents. I think that really actually, in terms of the tradition of it and also just going forward, it does not make for a productive and important relationship.
He's now given you that green light with his comments that you can carve your own path. So now that you have this ability to say that, to be on your own?
Well, no, going forward, there is no question that I bring my own experiences and my own life experiences.
Is there a policy that stands out to you in particular, either?
Sure. I mean, my approach to what we need to do around Medicare covering home health care, born out of my experience of taking care of my mother. My priority on housing, one, because I know what it means, affordable housing and the ability to buy a home. Again, my own experience, my mother saved up, and not until I was a teenager was she able to do it. But also I know that for so many young people who I speak with around our country, the American dream is just really out of reach. So my policy about $25,000 down payment assistance to help them get their foot in the door. The work that I have been doing and will bring to the presidency around emphasizing small businesses as being part of the real backbone of America's economy. Those are the experiences and the ideas that I have that are about moving forward and really in being a part of the next generation of leadership.
So, Kristen, as you heard in that exchange, she was reluctant, due to her loyalty, as she described it, to say anything critical about any of President Biden's policies over the course of these last 3.5 years, which does put her in a bit of a unique position right now. Increasingly, as I've spoken to undecided voters, including in places like Michigan and in Wisconsin, where I was just yesterday, they have asked specifically what might be different about her than is about Joe Biden. And it comes against the backdrop of polling that we have found and has been seen across this country that most Americans think the country is headed in the wrong direction right now. That's under President Biden's leadership. So specifically where those differences would be. Other takeaway I would just raise for you right now, and I asked her about the gender gap specifically. She leads among women, according to our recent poll, by 14 points, down among men by 16 points. I asked her why she thinks that is, why she thinks there is a disconnect. She said, in effect, that she doesn't think she's doing all that poorly with men. She says, look around, there are plenty of men here. She says that's not her experience, that she's having a challenge among men. But I will tell you, at the same time as she is saying that, her campaign just today shared information about how, for the first time, it is targeting men more aggressively on some of the places where they are, including some of those popular platforms, including sports betting sites like DraftKings, now advertising there for the first time, sports news sites, fantasy sports sites. They've also been advertising in recent weeks to try to target those male voters and some of the college football games, the NFL games, and Major League Baseball playoff games as well, Kristen.
It really is a significant shift, Peter, that we're seeing in terms of their outreach targeted toward trying to energize and mobilize male voters around her. Peter, I think you pushed her more than we've seen so far on that very critical question, and you're absolutely right. A lot of undecided voters really want to hear her answer that question. So to hear her talk about Medicare and housing, I think will be very significant to a lot of voters. Peter, congrats on the great get. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch you on Nightly News tonight. Garrett, let me head over to you. We saw Donald Trump on Fox and Friends today. He has, frankly, spent time this week mostly with friendly media. What are your sources telling you about what this basically means for his strategy in this home stretch?
Yeah, Kristen, look, it's always a little bit challenging to tell what Donald Trump is thinking, but in this case, very easy to see what he's doing, and it's all consistent. He is doing everything he can not to put himself in a position where he might face even the kind of follow-up questioning we just saw from Peter with the vice president, much less what the vice president went through with her interview with Bret Baier. All of the interviews he's been doing have been friendly. This long sit-down on Fox and Friends. He's been doing various podcasts and canceling interviews with NBC News and with CNBC. It looks like prevent defense, to use a football metaphor here. You might give up big chunks. You might give up the opportunity where he does, take questions at a gaggle or that kind of thing, but never put yourself in a position where you might get really put on your back foot. It suggests to me that the Trump campaign, either one of two things or possibly a combination of both, either thinks they are winning this race, perhaps quite narrowly, or thinks that the biggest risk to them at this moment is Donald Trump being significantly pushed in front of a large audience to say something he shouldn't. They are trying to sort of avoid both of those possibilities with a strategy that largely has him just talking to big crowds like the one that's starting to gather behind me here in Detroit.
Well, Garrett, you're so right about that. And as you've been speaking, we've been watching him at a campaign event there in Michigan. He heads to Detroit next. Garrett, talk a little bit about the significance of this. Obviously, Detroit, deep blue area, and he made some pretty eyebrow-raising comments the last time he was in Detroit.
Yeah, and this has been such an interesting thing to watch, Kristen, because Donald Trump actually did better in Detroit proper in 2020 when he lost than he did in 2016 when he won. He has improved his standing in urban areas, in part by appealing more to Latino voters. He's making tiny but somewhat significant, given how close all these margins are, gains with African-American voters. In Detroit, he has been trashing the city sort of conceptually, saying it's, you know, if you don't vote for him, every city in America is going to look like Detroit. But I got to tell you, I was talking to some Trump supporters earlier today who said, yeah, we get that. You know, we understand why people think we have this problem here. Harris is using those comments against Trump in other parts of the state. I'm not as convinced it cuts against him as badly as it might otherwise appear here in Detroit.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Garrett. Let's talk about some of the great reporting you've been doing on the ground, talking to Mormon voters who could, quite frankly, make all the difference in key swing states. What are they telling you about the state of this race?
And Kristen, this is a subgroup of voters I've been fascinated by ever since I covered the Romney campaign. Reliably conservative, small c, in basically every possible way, but in many cases heavily motivated by the character of a candidate. They seek moderation. They seek consensus. It's a church characteristic. It's a characteristic that is sort of passed down through their leadership, and they have broken from Trump sometimes in significant ways during the Trump era and from other Trump-associated politicians. We saw some of that divide and that angst about how to balance their faith and their conservatism in some interviews I conducted in Arizona last week. Listen to this.
He is a statesman. He is very respectful. What he's doing right now, he's a politician. He has to appeal to the voters. And so he has a personality. But again, I'm not voting on personality. I'm voting on policy.
So, Terry, I'll pick up with you on that point. I sort of see you reacting out of the corner of my eye.
I think Trump's a character, but I don't think he has any character, would be the way I would describe it.
Can you square your conservative principles with a vote for Kamala Harris?
So there is one conservative principle that I hold very dearly that is going to push me towards Harris. That is the rule of law and the peaceful transfer of power. Trust me, I wish there was another option. I wish Nikki Haley was on the ballot. I would be very enthusiastically supporting her. But I have Trump, and he's not an option based on my principles.
Kristen, Joe Biden got 18% of the LDS vote in Arizona in 2020, a state that he won by 11,000 votes. You do the math, that's the margin. So this voting bloc, although small nationally, could matter a great deal in some of these Western battlegrounds in particular.
It's just fascinating to hear from them, Garrett, and to hear her, the last woman you spoke with in particular, talk about Nikki Haley, because you think about what will decide this race, and in many ways it's those Nikki Haley voters. So fantastic interview with them, Garrett. Thank you so much for bringing that to us. Trymaine Lee, let me turn to you. You're in my hometown of Philly at a voter registration event aimed at black voters. Talk to me about what voters there are telling you. Are they feeling energized? And just a little bit of strategy for folks who aren't familiar with the key to winning Pennsylvania. Part of it involves driving up turnout in Philadelphia and the Philadelphia area, right?
That's right, Kristen. Here in our favorite city of Philadelphia, go Birds. You know, talking to black men in particular, not just voters and not just Eagles fans, but black men about what they care about most, what issues they'll be carrying into the polling places with them. And a few things emerged. One was that as men, they want to feel solid and whole and have opportunities to be able to provide for themselves, provide for their families, and provide for their communities. But also, as we speak to how much attention politically has been shown down on black men, there's also been a lot of browbeating, as many of them, a growing number of them, a small but still growing number of them, are still trying to figure out which of these two politicians serve them best, even though for some it seems obvious. But I gathered a group of guys here, everyday guys, who talked to me about what their motivations are. Check it out. Do you think one of these two candidates, whether it's Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, are best positioned to help you in that kind of situation?
Right now, I'm leaning more towards Kamala Harris in that regard.
How about you guys? Which would y'all lean in?
That's where I'm going with it.
How did you land on Kamala Harris? Was it a process, or did you know all along?
Definitely was a process. I mean,
hearing certain things that I heard, certain feedback that I heard, or what she was trying to get to the community, research, and to help us or whatever. You know what I mean? So like, we're still going to have a battle. It's going to be a long road ahead of us.
The message here for, black men, especially in North Philadelphia, a very black section of this city, is that folks should feel comfortable participating in the process. And so if you're on the sidelines for whatever reason, they're not telling you to vote for one or the other, but they're saying, black men, we want to hear your voice, get involved, and register to vote.
And it echoes kind of what we heard from former President Barack Obama when he had that stern message to black men. Basically, don't stay at home, don't sit this one out, get out and vote. And that's just a part of the outreach we have seen the Harris campaign make to black voters and black men in particular. How is that being received in Philadelphia, Trymaine?
There are a couple things here. One thing that I've been hearing all across this country this entire election season and in Philadelphia is that black men want to be heard, want to be acknowledged, and perhaps most of all, want to be respected as men, as more than just a pathology, as more than just folks who are incarcerated, as more than just people who are most likely to be victims of gun violence or perpetrators of gun violence. Come to us as whole thinkers. And so now that folks actually are engaging with intentionality around black men, saying, black men, we want to hear your concerns and we want you to vote for us. We don't want you to take for granted. That's been a pretty resonant message here, especially when another thing you'll hear time and again is that politicians will come around when it's time for elections and they'll ask for your vote, but then you never see them again. And the quality of your life in your community doesn't change. The job prospects don't change. Nothing changes. So they want to see you face to face as a politician, hear your piece, and have to choose.
Well, Trymaine, great interviews and great reporting as always. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Yasmin, let me head over to you. You were in Michigan this week talking to Lebanese American voters. They feel as though their community has been neglected. What was their message to you, Yasmin?
They literally told me they feel like second, third, fourth class citizens, that the only time in which folks actually want to hear from them, right, that they spend time with them, these politicians, these lawmakers, is when they want their vote, when they want to retain power in Washington. But in the interim, in the 4 years between these presidential elections, they are forgotten. And they feel as if the war in Gaza, the war in Lebanon is reflective of that notion, of that feeling, right? These are people who every day are checking in with their family, for instance, in Beirut, and wondering if they're still alive. One of the individuals I spoke to talked about how his entire cousin's family died just a couple of days ago, and he found out via telegram. His grandfather's house had been bombed and no longer standing. They are feeling this in a very visceral way, this war, and they are voting with one issue, Kristen, in mind. Let's take a listen to more of what they had to say, and then we'll talk on the other side.
Who is voting for Donald Trump in 24?
It's possible.
It's possible.
Yeah. It's definitely not by Harris, that's for sure.
Who's voting for Kamala Harris here? Absolutely no.
No. Not possible.
There's nothing she can do or say for us to change our mind.
Who's voting third party in 2024?
Good chance.
So Jill Stein.
Most likely. It's also a possibility that some of us will just abstain from voting altogether, but we do know that that's not the best political strategy.
The campaign that the Democrats ran was that Donald Trump hates us. I felt safe, though, in the country when Trump was in office. I don't feel safe right now with Kamala in office.
I was hard-pressed, Kristen, to find a Harris supporter that was willing to go on camera in the Lebanese community. We talked for days with folks, some of which were voting for Kamala Harris in this election. But they compared it to 2016, when many people in the Arab American community didn't feel comfortable talking about the fact that they supported then Donald Trump, then candidate Trump. And they feel as if now, if they're voting for Harris, they will be ostracized and or targeted in their community. And so they're not being outspoken about it. But the sentiment amongst this community, by the way, 200,000 strong Arab Americans, potential voters in Michigan, really could obviously swing an important state, is that they feel forgotten and the country is broken and they want to see They want to see major change.
Yasmin, just 10 seconds. Do you think if there's a ceasefire deal, a release of the hostages, could that change their calculation? Some of the folks who are saying we're going to vote third party,
no,
we're going to sit it out.
No, I mean, I've been visiting Michigan for the last year since the primaries in February. They didn't. They thought about possibly changing their mind then, considering how things were going to play out. 2 weeks out, there's nothing changing their mind at this point, especially considering what they see as this tremendous amount of loss in their communities overseas.
Well, it's just absolutely fascinating reporting and tremendous interviews. Yasmin, Vossoughian, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kristen.
Really appreciate it. Coming up, former President Trump's inflammatory remarks about Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, brazenly suggesting Ukrainian President Zelensky is to blame. And a closer look at Nevada's critical Senate race as Republican Sam Brown comes out swinging against Democratic incumbent Senator Jackie Rosen in last night's debate. My panel joins me to break it all down next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Early in-person voting begins tomorrow in the battleground state of Nevada. In addition to the presidential race, Nevada is at the heart of the fight for control of the Senate, where Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen is facing a challenge from Republican Sam Brown. That race took a heated turn last night when the candidates squared off in a contentious debate in Las Vegas. Brown, an Afghanistan war vet, depicted himself as an outsider while repeatedly calling Rosen an elitist and an insider. Look.
Look, this is exactly the sort of thing that Nevadans are tired of, is this kind of insider politician talk. Look, Nevada, we have a choice to make. This is a choice about our future. This is a choice about our families. This is a choice about whether or not we continue to have the leaders, the insiders like Senator Rosen, continuing to vote and to cast their vision for us.
Rosen, meanwhile, touted her record in trying to make housing more affordable for Nevadans.
What I would work on first, and what I have legislation to do, is affordable housing. I have a bill called the Home Act. It's to make sure that those corporate investors that come to Nevada, they continue to buy up our homes and they jack up the prices. We need to make sure they're not able to do that. I have a bill that will hold them accountable, that will fine them, that will put money back into affordable housing.
For more, I'm joined by Jasmine Wright, reporter for Notice, Simone Sanders Townsend, former chief spokesperson for Vice President Harris, and now a co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, and Michael Dubke, White House communications director during the Trump administration. Thanks to all of you for being here.
Absolutely.
Mike, let me start with you.
Sure.
Your takeaways from that debate, the clips at least that we saw, and the implications. This is yet another race that we're watching closely.
Well, I think what you saw there, at least in those two clips, is a front runner who's trying to just stay calm and deflect everything that the challenger, who is 5 points down in the polls when you look at the averages, is throwing at her. So it's a very typical kind of debate that is going on, but you know, Nevada is one of those states, and we can talk about the Senate, we can talk about the presidential race, but there's 7 states, you know, and they weirdly have Senate races going on at the same time as presidential races. But there's some of these places where Trump and Harris are neck and neck, and the Republican is not getting the same type of support as Donald Trump is. And it's a anomaly in a couple of states, Arizona and Nevada, and we'll see if that lasts on Election Day. But that, to me, is the big, strange thing.
I mean, Sam Brown has struggled to gain traction in this race. Yeah. And I think in that debate, what you saw is him trying to just get it any way he can. He's like, something is going to take here. One of the things I felt was notable from the debate is Democrats have casted him as someone who's like not of the state. And then there's a moment in the debate where he says, well, since I've moved here, and I'm like, no, this is making their case. So still, this is going to be, this is a race that Democrats are watching very closely and that they are not taking for granted because they don't want to look up on Election Day and they got one less seat than they were counting on.
That's right. The margins are so close, and Democrats are so concerned about losing.
They're so
the
close.
Senate. They're going to lose West Virginia by all accounts, and so they're watching Ohio. They're watching Nevada, Montana. Yes.
Yeah, I think that the better that Jackie Rosen does in the state, the better that Kamala Harris does in the state, right? So it's not just about keeping the Senate for Democrats, although that is a major, major push that we hear people talking about in Washington every day. But it is also about trying to keep the state viable and competitive to kind of of make sure that she has her equities in place when it comes to that battleground strategy. I think one thing about Jackie Rosen is she's kind of the last product from the Reid machine. Obviously, he handpicked her in 2018. And so not only, I think kind of the inverse of maybe Sam Brown, or people are feeling maybe he doesn't have the type of support from the RNC and from Republicans because that poll or those polls are starting to widen. Jackie Rosen has all the support from Democrats across the country. And so I think that in addition to just how people feel about the race, is maybe a product of those kind of expanding numbers, just because she is such a supported candidate by the institutional Democrats.
Yeah, all right, let's turn to the presidential race now. There are a lot of new comments by both candidates, including this podcast that former President Trump did. And what's notable about the exchange I'm about to play, where he doubles down on questioning Kamala Harris's race, it's again this strategy that seems aimed at turning out the Trump base. Take a look.
Kamala, who is apparently black, she's up 41. And
what do you mean by apparently?
I mean, that's what they're telling us. We're supposed to believe she's black.
No,
and,
it's much better that, no. See, I would never say a thing like that. But you said, don't explain to what you mean. No, I don't want to put you in trouble.
I'm very comfortable explaining it because overnight, she's doing a show. She's supposed to be Indian. And then all of a sudden now it's black.
They have a woman who is black, although you would say she's Indian, but she is black. But she really, a lot of people didn't know, which is true. But
I learned about it just a couple months ago. I mean, the fact
that she's black or that she's Indian.
The fact that she's black. I thought she was Indian until a couple months ago. Things changed.
Yasmin.
I mean, do they not understand the concept of mixed race people? I don't understand what the issue is here. And also, I mean, I'm not giving the vice president's team any ideas, but I would definitely put apparently black on a bumper sticker.
I'd wear the shirt.
I mean, I think that this is just another round of Trump being divisive, throwing red meat to his base. This is a base turnout election. Even though the vice president is focused on Nikki Haley voters, even though the former president is focused on Latino and black male voters, right? This is a base election. And so he is doing everything in his power to kick up the divisiveness, because that is what gets a lot of his followers to come out on election day. And that is what he needs. He needs people to come out for him just in case the vice president is successful in getting folks to defect from the Republican Party, which may not be a huge amount, but of course this is going to be a race that comes up to the margins.
Are you making shirts, Simone? What are you?
Look, if somebody on the internet makes an apparently black shirt, I promise you, I might put that in my little Etsy card. Let me just say two things. One, I think what he did in this clip particularly is a depression tactic, in terms of there is an undercurrent out there in the underbelly of conversation that doesn't always make it up to cable news about the vice president not actually being black. And so what that is that is a dog whistle to the people who are disproportionately black who say that, and again, in this underbelly, the small subset, to say, see, we're questioning if she's really black, like, don't vote for this non-black, actually black person. A depression tactic.
I actually think the bigger issue here, or the more macro bet, is that each of these campaigns are going in two very different directions and making very big bets on two different tactics. I think the Trump campaign has decided we are going to turn out not just the base, but we're going to find those voters that generally don't vote in elections, but maybe the 40% of Americans that don't turn out on election day, but we think we can identify and bring out. And the Harris campaign is making the other bet, which is we're not just going to depend on the base that Biden did. We're going to try to grow that base and grab some disaffected voters. Big bets on both sides, and we'll find out on November 5th or a week later, as you said. We'll find out who was right.
Can I just say this is a glaring disparity, though, I think a double standard, because Donald Trump gets out here, doesn't talk policy. He's in these interviews from the Al Smith dinner, whether in what he's talking about on Fox News, not talking policy, seems a little jumbled on what he's talking about, canceling interviews, and I just think the level of scrutiny about what he is doing and not doing and what he is saying is not being adequately applied across the board.
Mike, your response to that, and is part of that because he has been at the top of the ticket for longer. He's been, since 2016.
If you really want to get, if we want to get into the metrics of this, of how many interviews Harris Walz have done versus Trump, Vance. I mean, the numbers are diametrically opposed. He has been doing these hard interviews.
She did just do Fox interview, though.
She did just do Fox interview, and you know what? Now she's got the right. Now she's got the ability to say, "I went into the lion's den and I fought."
And she just talked to our own Peter Alexander.
All due respect to Peter, he ain't the lion's den in the same way that Fox is.
Well, he pressed her.
No,
he did press her.
He did.
He did.
Well, I think to Simone's point, it's different from the volume of interviews. I think we could all look at the numbers and say, yes, Trump has done more volume. Maybe they've been more friendlies, but he's sat for more interviews, right? Versus the type of scrutiny that comes out of those two. When Harris has a gaffe, right, it makes the front page news. When Trump says something like, apparently she's black, or yes, it's true, most people didn't know that she's black, it kind of goes past the wayside.
So I think the 60 Minutes interview, it would not be.
I will be very fast about this. Yes. I will be very fast about it. Here's the big difference. The world, America, knows Donald Trump. We do not know Vice President Harris.
So that is a
major difference.
I think that everyone says that,
major difference.
But that is not an excuse that he not undergo the same type of scrutiny. And I think that that after the election, one of the analysis is going to be about how he hasn't undergone the scrutiny because everybody's like, oh, people know him.
Let me ask you very quickly about Peter's interview, very quickly, because I think we're running out of time really soon. Peter asked her to, give one example of where you differ from President Biden. And I thought it was notable because we're hearing a new line from her, basically saying she's loyal to the president. And that's how the relationship between the president and vice president, that's what it should look like. It was the first time we've really heard her say that. A source said that to me earlier today. So I thought it was notable that here she is saying that.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail. This has been a conversation or a point that folks on the campaign, that folks close to her have been telling us privately for weeks when the conversation would continue to happen is why doesn't she have something directly to say that she would do differently than Biden? Because we know, and I know in my reporting, that she didn't always agree with Biden, that she wanted to push Biden in certain areas. We know on marijuana, student loans, I'm sure Simone can tell us a host of other issues from being in the office, that she wanted to push Biden. So why can't she just bring out one of those? So I think this is kind of them giving her the reality or giving her something to say that is truth, which is that she doesn't want to be disloyal to Biden, but also maybe giving her some small little things to try to create
I think this was driven by her. I really do. I think that there were maybe aides that wanted her to say something different.
Absolutely.
And she was like, I am unwilling to do that, but I will do this.
And from a practical standpoint, the last time she disagreed with him, he went into the White House briefing room and held a press conference on top of an event she was supposed to have. So there's some realpolitik part of this as well.
Well, it's a fine line she is walking. It is a fantastic Friday conversation. Thank you so much, Yasmin, Simone, and Mike. Really appreciate it. Coming up after the break, we will talk about the fallout from Yahya Sinwar's death. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We continue to learn more about Israel's military operation that killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar on Wednesday. The drone video released by Israel appears to show Sinwar just moments before his death, though NBC News has not been able to independently confirm that. The IDF says Sinwar had fled alone into a building, masked and wounded from gunfire, as he threw a plank towards the drone. In a televised eulogy, Sinwar's longtime deputy said nothing has changed in Hamas's war against Israel, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told Israelis that the war is not over. However, during a joint press conference while traveling abroad in Germany, President Biden said Sinwar's death now presents an opportunity for a ceasefire.
The death of the leader of Hamas represents a moment of justice. He had the blood of Americans and Israelis, Palestinians and Germans and so many others on his hands. I told the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday, let's also make this moment an opportunity to seek a path to peace, a better future in Gaza without Hamas.
Joining me now is Hala Gorani from Tel Aviv. Hala, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. What more are you learning today about Sinwar's death and the implications of it?
We're learning, Kristen, some new details about what led to the killing of Yahya Sinwar. I spoke to the former head of the National Security Council here in Israel, who was briefed as part of a regular briefing by commanders intimately involved in this operation. And what he told me is that although the fact that these soldiers encountered Sinwar sort of by chance during a routine operation, that in fact the Israeli military had suspected for weeks that Yahya Sinwar was in Tal Sultan in Rafah near the Egyptian border because, according to Major General Eland, they had found something interesting in the tunnel where 6 of the Israeli hostages were killed at the end of August. Listen.
About 6 weeks ago, the bodies of 6 Israelis were found in the tunnel in the area of Tel Sultan. It was clear that the DNA of Sinwar was there. So the conclusion was that, number one, he was there with them, and they actually probably served him as a human shield. Number two, that he did not have a chance to escape from this neighborhood. So the assumption was that he was there.
So that's why, according to the Major General there, more Israeli troops were sent to Tal Sultan, that particular area, because he told me that the tunnels that would have allowed for Sinwar to escape to another part of Gaza had been destroyed, which could be part of the reason that he was ultimately found above ground. And he also told me that another drone was sent the day after his killing to provide some sort of identification before his body was then retrieved from the rubble, Kristen.
Well, it's just fascinating to hear from the Major General indeed. Let me ask you about the big question. Of course, Secretary Blinken traveling to the region. What is the level of optimism that this could, in fact, lead to a ceasefire and the release of the remaining hostages?
Well, the level of optimism is low, to be frank. We're hearing from what is left of the Hamas leadership that they intend on fighting, that the death of Sinwar doesn't mean that they are abandoning their cause or their struggle, as they describe it. We also heard from the Israeli Prime Minister, who said that this war will continue with full force. It's really only the president who seems to express any kind of optimism that this could lead to a ceasefire, even though he did walk back some of that optimism today, saying that there was a chance maybe for Lebanon, but that it would be a lot harder to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza, Kristen.
All right. Well, thank you for that sober assessment. Haake, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And now I want to bring in Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from Connecticut and the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Himes, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So let me pick up right there where my conversation left off with Haake. She said that there is not much optimism that the death of Yahya Sinwar will ultimately lead to a ceasefire and a release of the hostages. What is your perspective on the significance of the death and whether a ceasefire is possible?
Well, it's obviously significant. It's significant from the standpoint of justice being delivered to a truly awful, monstrous terrorist, who really did lead the horrendous events of a year ago against Israel, in which 1,200 people were murdered. So it's significant from the standpoint of justice being delivered, and it's also significant from the standpoint of illustrating what we've seen over and over again, which is Israeli military and technological capability. Whether it was the pagers exploding in Lebanon, or the attack that killed Nasrallah, now the attack on Sinwar. What makes me very cautious about this, and I don't really want to use the word pessimistic because so much is at stake, but what makes me really cautious is that Hamas is populated by people like Sinwar. These are dead enders. These are nihilists, right, who in some cases would rather just create chaos and anger and rage and go down as martyrs in a sea of blood than they would sit across from the Israelis or the Americans or anybody else at a negotiating table. So, one of the key ingredients here is going to be what the Palestinian people themselves, who certainly in Gaza have not had an opportunity to express their will, but if the Palestinian people of Gaza say this is a dead end and we will no longer be led by dead enders, maybe, just maybe, there's a crack in the door for a solution here.
And based on what we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, that this war is not over, do you think that if that were to happen, if that crack were to open up, do you think he would be willing to try to get a ceasefire at this juncture? Does he see this as the same type of turning point?
I would hope that he does. You know, he has done some important things, controversially, of course, because of the loss of life in Gaza and the loss of innocent life in Lebanon. But he has done some important things, which is to demonstrate to his enemies that there really is no place that they can hide. At a moment in time, remember, on October 8th, people said, what just happened in Israel? We thought they were the best of the best, and yet they lost 1,200 people. So he has demonstrated that. What I think he needs to do now, because, you know, the leadership, decimated as it may be, of Hamas, when they say we're not done, that is true. I think what the Prime Minister needs to do now, and this is really essential to winning the hearts and minds of Palestinians, is to outline a vision for the future of the Palestinian people that he would be willing to risk political capital for to achieve. Hamas is, you know, they're more than just a military. They have a dark, evil vision, but as long as that's the only vision available to young men in Gaza, they will get recruits. So I would hope that the Prime Minister would seize this moment to say, here's what the future could be if we all stretch and if we all expend some political capital right now.
How concerned are you about a leadership vacuum, Congressman?
Well, a leadership vacuum, I assume you're talking about Hamas.
Yes, with Hamas, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a scenario that is not much discussed. But, you know, if you have 2 or 3 heirs apparent to Sinwar, there's always the possibility for infighting. Now, that might be good from the standpoint of weakening Hamas. But of course, it would, you know, as so much of this has been, it would be in all likelihood brutal for the Palestinian civilian population of Hamas. So we're going to need to watch this. And of course, you know, the moment somebody is identified as the next leader, they now have the most dangerous job on the planet, because as the Israelis have demonstrated, they will find these people and they will end them. So again, I don't put a lot of stock in Hamas's ability to say this is the moment where all of a sudden we become negotiators and moderate and you know, are willing to sort of compromise. But I would hope that the Palestinian people would say this is an opportunity, that the Prime Minister of Israel would say this is an opportunity, and stretch towards each other in the service of ending this war.
Are you anticipating that Iran will respond?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question, right? If we think about what has happened to Iran in this last year, they had the head of Hamas assassinated in a heavily guarded Iranian compound. They stood by as Nasrallah was killed, as these various Israeli operations have happened. They stood by as 2, not 1, but 2 missile attacks on Israel were largely neutered. So I would think the Iranian regime right now would say, you know what this game is doing? This game is showing how weak we are to the world. And so maybe there's a different path. Now, again, ascribing moderate sentiments to the Iranian regime is probably a losing bet. But man, they can't look at this and say that our standing in the eyes of our people or in the eyes of the world has risen in the last year.
Congressman, if I could, I want to turn to the presidential election. I want to ask you broadly, in terms of where we are right now, you look at the polls, this is a very close, very competitive race in all of the battleground states. Vice President Kamala Harris told Fox News this week that her presidency would not be a continuation of President Biden's presidency. Excuse me. And she just spoke with my colleague, Peter Alexander, and told him, look, she is not going to criticize President Biden, that she's loyal, and that's not how she sees the relationship between a president and vice president. What do you make of this messaging, and do you think it is enough and that it will give voters the clarity they need as they make their decision?
Yeah. Call me crazy, but I guess I would hope that undecided voters today wouldn't be mulling over the precise degree of loyalty that a vice president should be showing to the president. And while acting as vice president, how much space you could between that's an unbelievably esoteric question compared to, do we really want to elect somebody who is determined to identify the enemy within, by which he means his political opponents, as the real enemy, and to use the military and the Department of Justice against that so-called enemy within? And I could go on the statements that Donald Trump has made over and over and over again. I could go on the fact that Donald Trump has no real ideology, right? He, devastated the reproductive freedoms of America's woman. And now that he's realized that it makes him a little bit unpopular, he's running in exactly the other direction. So, boy, I would really hope that undecided people in this country would not use the degree of loyalty of a vice president to a president as the factor in making their decision, when the contrast between decency and indecency and forward-looking and backward-looking and egotism and a commitment to the country, the facts there are just so clear.
All right. Congressman Jim Himes, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Much more after this. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. With Election Day now just 18 days away, we received another reminder today of the legal challenges facing Donald Trump with the unsealing of more than 1,800 pages of documents from the former president's federal election interference case. Judge Tanya Chutkin, who's presiding over the case, defended a request from Mr. Trump's lawyers to keep those documents sealed until after the election. It's worth noting that many of the files in the case remain redacted. Judge Chutkin is reviewing what evidence can be used against the former president in light of this summer's Supreme Court Immunity Court ruling that narrowed the scope of special counsel Jack Smith's case. NBC News Justice and Intelligence Correspondent Ken Delanian joins me now. Ken, thanks so much for being here. So talk about this appendix. What were the key takeaways of what was released today?
Hey, Kristen. Well, this was a massive document, nearly 1,900 pages, but most of those pages were blank. They were redacted. So it's really not clear to me why the Trump team fought so hard to keep this secret, because what was made public today was largely, almost exclusively, information that had already been in the public domain. Doesn't really add to our understanding of the case. The really sensitive stuff, the FBI interviews, the grand jury testimony, that all remains sealed. This is evidence that supported Jack Smith's brief that he filed a few weeks ago, arguing that the bulk of this case can stand under the Supreme Court's immunity decision. Perhaps the most interesting thing about this publication today was the judge's justification for it. Tanya Chutkin really pushed back on the idea that she was engaging in election interference here. She said that by withholding this information, which should be released in the natural course of litigation, that could also be seen as election interference. After all, she said she's hewing to the schedule set by the Supreme Court when they handed down their ruling. So the next big milestones in this case will happen after the election. And what that really means, Kristen, is the next big day in this case is Election Day, because if Donald Trump wins, he can eventually make this case go away.
All right, Ken Delanian, as always, on top of the developing news for us. Really appreciate it. Coming up next, a revolution in women's sports. We'll have a preview of my Meet the Moment interview with two women's sports icons as women's teams are gaining more and more viewers and more ground. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Once an afterthought, it's now a cultural phenomenon. Women's professional sports in America are booming. The women's NCAA basketball tournament had more viewers than the men's this year. Ticket prices and TV ratings are soaring in the WNBA finals right now, and women brought home the lion's share of Team USA's medals in the Paris Olympics. In an exclusive Meet the Moment interview for this Sunday's Meet the Press, I sat down with a pair of female sports icons who helped pave the way. Olympic gold medalist and two-time FIFA World Cup champion Megan Rapinoe, and five-time Olympic champion and four-time WNBA champion Sue Bird for their perspective on the state of women's sports. Here's some of that conversation.
Now you're seeing the investment match the quality and the ability of the players. You're seeing the investment match the appetite that the fans have and the demand from the fans. The demand from the fans has been there the whole time. There's just things haven't been available, whether that's on streaming or whether that's on TV or whatever it may be. And I think this moment is like I feel like we just came to the end of all the excuses of why nobody likes women's sports, and it turns out everybody watches women's sports. Everybody likes it. Everybody's into it. Turns out, oh, we're really good at sports. We're really entertaining. We're actually really amazing off the court. We care about our teammates. We care about our community. We care about politics. We care about making the world a better place, and it's an incredibly desirable product for people to watch, for players to play in, for sponsors to sponsor, for people to put on TV. So it's like we always just feel like we've been knowing this is ready, and I feel like everyone else is now ready for that.
A lot of times we're not looked at based on our potential, right? Whether it's a young athlete, somebody who has already accomplished a lot, it's never like, oh, let me invest in this and see what happens in 5 to 10 years because I see something. It's always, okay, what have you done, and do you deserve to be paid now based on what you did do, but never looking to the future. I would challenge, corporate sponsorships, so companies, businesses, TV networks, to start looking at us based on our potential, what they think is going to happen, not, well, let's wait and see in a couple years to see if this is real. Like, none of that.
Really great conversation. Thank you for being with us this hour. We will have more Meet the Press now on Monday. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. I'll be joined by Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and Senator Lindsey Graham as we get down to the wire in the 2024 campaign. NBC News Now coverage continues with Yasmin Vossoughian right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.